January the 28th, 1986. Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Space Shuttle Challenger, and we know we share this pain with all of the American people. Today is truly a day of national mourning. Although President Reagan's speech was ranked number 8 on the American Rhetoric website, this day still lives in the lives and hearts of the American people as much as the day that President Kennedy was assassinated. I remember where I was and what I was doing that day. I'm going to talk about the things that made this speech memorable. The content of this speech was achingly tender. You could hear the sadness and grief in the tone of his voice. His eye contact never wavered, and there were no discernible gestures. As an American, this speech was a promise that the United States space program would not be diminished because of the tragedy of the Space Shuttle Challenger, the tragedy that took 7 American lives, 7 astronauts who were pulling us into the future, who knew the risk and met the challenge bravely. The tone that President Reagan used that day was somber, compassionate, but it was also hopeful that the Americans would not lose their interest in space exploration. His points were directed toward the families of the fallen heroes, toward the children who watched and witnessed the tragedy of the Space Shuttle Challenger, and also to the men and women who worked for NASA. His passion for all of those that was hit by the tragedy was evident in his grief-stricken tone, his steady eye contact, and his non-wavering faith and respect for our space program. He never took his eyes off the camera and never looked at any notes. His appearance and demeanor were appropriate. He wore a black suit and tie and a simple white shirt. There were no gestures, and he remained sitting behind his desk at the Oval Office. His being seated behind his desk seemed appropriate for the news that he had to deliver to the American people that day. There was not an audience that could be seen, but I sat in stunned silence as I listened to his speech. And I realized that many people that day, whether they were at home or at work or at play, would have been devastated and shocked by the news that was playing out across their television sets. In conclusion, this speech gave Americans a chance to mourn the loss of 7 astronauts and a hope and desire that the space program would continue. President Reagan gave a speech that was eloquent and motivational, and his words encouraged the families of the fallen heroes that they were brave and would be remembered. Nearly 28 years later, Reagan's desire to see the space program continue has stopped, but I do believe our desire for space exploration has not been diminished.